The black Range Rover didn't stop. It glided slow and unstoppable down the soaked slope of my lawn like a luxury yacht on launch day. Clarissa Bloom's scream pierced the quiet morning just as her front bumper plunged into my koi pond with a glorious splash. And as she scrambled out drenched and furious, all I did was sip my coffee and say, "Should have stayed on the street, Clarissa." It all started with a Range Rover and a garden full of hydrangeas. Now, I know that's not a sentence you hear every day, but then again, it's not every day that a $60,000 British luxury SUV slowly annexes your front lawn 1 inch at a time, like some glossy black tank with leather seats and a Bluetooth connection. And it's definitely not every day that the woman driving it a vision in coordinated floral athleisure and malice waves at you like she's blessing a peasant at Versailles while doing it. My name is Daniel Reese. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, which is just a fancy way of saying I spend my time figuring out how to keep things in the air from crashing into the ground. I'd always assumed my biggest challenges in life would come in the form of metal fatigue or differential pressure failures, not turf disputes and HOA fiefdoms. But life, like lawn sod on a slope, has a funny way of slipping sideways when you least expect it. When I bought the house in Rose Meadow Bluffs, it felt like a small slice of heaven-ocean breeze, flowering trees, and a front lawn that sloped gently toward a koi pond I'd restored with my own hands. I planted a row of bold blue hydrangeas along the eastern border, meticulously spaced and trimmed, so that every bloom framed the pond like something out of a landscaping catalog. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was, I thought, mine. Enter Clarissa Bloom. If ever there was a woman born to wield clipboards and passive aggression like twin swords, it was Clarissa. 58 years old, though she'd shaved at least a decade off in official HOA materials, Clarissa had moved into Rose Meadow Bluffs roughly 6 months after I did. By the end of her first spring, she had taken over the HOA presidency, not through election so much as attrition. Most of the other board members were too tired or too intimidated to stop her. She wore floral activewear in hues so bright you needed sunglasses just to look at her directly. And her Range Rover Velar was always parked just slightly off kilter, as if no mere painted line could hope to contain her. At first, I didn't mind her. She seemed like any other bored suburban commander-in-chief, over-involved and underemployed. She'd wave as she marched down the street with her laminated beautification standards binder and her toy poodle named Camilla, who had a pearl-encrusted collar and the dead eyes of a tax auditor. But then she started parking. Not on the street, mind you, not even halfway on the curb. No, Clarissa Bloom decided without so much as a text or knock that the edge of my lawn made for a more elegant parking buffer whenever she visited Mrs. Salazar next door. Just 2 tires at first, then 4. And not just the edge. A full 2 feet of her expensive, shining beast began to squat on the slope of my front yard, compressing the grass and leaving faint but unmistakable indentations next to my prize sprinkler heads. The first time it happened, I chalked it up to a mistake. Maybe the curb was too crowded. Maybe she was in a rush. So I did the neighborly thing. I walked over with a pair of gardening gloves on and politely said, "Hey, Clarissa, would you mind not parking on the lawn? It's on a slope and the soil gets compacted pretty easily." She tilted her oversized sunglasses down her nose, looked at me like I just asked her to hand wash my socks, and smiled that thin, frosty smile of someone who considers kindness a competitive sport. "Oh, sweetie," she said. "I'm just popping in for a second. Camilla hates the sidewalk cracks. They make her anxious." Camilla at that moment was being carried like a clutch purse. I let it slide. For a while, just a second became the norm. Then a second became every Tuesday and Thursday. Then those days turned into weekends, too. Her Range Rover became a regular uninvited guest on my lawn, and every visit left deeper tracks like the signature of arrogance pressed into soil. I left a polite note. She left her tires even deeper the next day. I tried waving and gesturing to the street. She returned my wave with the regal lift of 2 fingers, as if I were a subject in need of perspective. I appealed to the HOA board, of which she was, of course, the ruling empress. The response I got was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nothingness. The HOA encourages neighbors to resolve minor property disputes independently unless they interfere with shared common areas. Translation: good luck, nerd. I'm not a confrontational man by nature. I design fail-safes and optimize structures to withstand stress, not to provoke it. But the thing about engineers is we don't let problems go. We design solutions. I started keeping a log, photos, timestamps, GPS tag tire indentations. I even dusted off my old property survey and walked the line with a tape measure one Saturday at dawn. There was no question. She wasn't just on my lawn, she was well into it. Still, I hoped reason might prevail. I sent a certified letter firm but respectful. I even had it notarized. It stated in no uncertain terms that her vehicle was not to trespass on my property again, or I'd be forced to pursue legal remedies. I thought foolishly that would end it. The next day she pulled in even farther. No attempt at subtlety, just bold entitlement parked almost proudly across the edge of the koi pond path. Then she honked. Twice. A little cheerful beep beep, like she was celebrating her triumph. I stood there holding my pruning shears, feeling something shift deep inside me. Not rage exactly, not revenge. Something colder. Something calculated. Something mechanical. I looked down at the grooves her tires had carved into my lawn, then up at the slope of my property. I thought about weight distribution. I thought about moisture content. I thought about gravity. It was the first moment I conceived of Project Pedal Push. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had the makings of one. She had made a battlefield out of my hydrangeas. She wanted to park like she owned the place fine. But the thing about slopes and engineers is that both have a way of redirecting what doesn't belong. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was a little water. And Clarissa Bloom, Queen Bee of Rosemeadow Bluffs, was about to learn what happens when you mix arrogance with incline. They say revenge is best served cold. But as I stared out my office window at the sunlit slope where Clarissa Bloom had once again wedged her Range Rover like a flag of conquest, I was starting to think moisture might be more effective than malice. The behemoth sat perched exactly where my hydrangeas met the grass, the rear tire grazing the mulch bed like it had every right to exist there. And she'd honked. Again. 2 short, triumphant beeps. I didn't respond. I just watched, measured, calculated. I had designed engine mounts that could survive atmospheric re-entry. Surely I could design one lawn slippery enough to deliver justice. That evening I sat at my drafting desk. Yes, I still use one, surrounded by the kind of notes that would confuse and possibly alarm most people. A mix of pressure, flow rates, turf density calculations, rainfall simulation specs, and a spreadsheet labeled coefficient of friction, Bermuda grass, wet versus dry. Somewhere in the process, I'd scribbled Project Pedal Push across the top. A reminder that this wasn't about destruction, this was about restoration, boundaries, balance, and yes, hydrangeas. The first phase was reconnaissance. I studied her behavior like an engineer with a flight recorder. Clarissa visited Mrs. Salazar's home roughly 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday between 9:30 and 10:15 a.m. Her approach was always the same: coast around the corner, drop a wheel or two onto my grass exit in slow motion grace with Camilla in tow, and then disappear for 45 minutes. I began mapping tire positions. I took photos, not because I needed more evidence for the HOA, they'd already proven themselves spectacularly spineless, but because precision was going to be the key to what came next. Phase 2, irrigation. I already had a full in-ground sprinkler system, but it wasn't surgical enough. I needed saturation without suspicion, so I made a few modifications. I ordered 2 high-output ground-level rotating sprinkler heads online, the kind used on golf courses, and ran thin camouflage drip-line hose from the far side of the house, hidden beneath my mulch beds. The heads were flush with the grass when inactive. When on, they rotated just enough to coat the slope. She loved no more, no less. It was surgical, silent, and undetectable from curb level. I tested it at dawn while the neighborhood was still dreaming. Ran half cycles, timed drainage rates, adjusted angles. I wanted wet, not flooded, slick, not soupy, just enough to turn her arrogance into aquaplaning. The final phase was weather. I needed a forecast with 0 chance of rain. This had to look like an accident, preferably one caused by the heavens in a badly chosen parking spot. I checked 3 different weather apps religiously. When the dry spell came, I smiled. 5 straight days of sunshine were predicted starting the following Monday. The schedule was locked. That weekend, I made a show of renting a core aerator, poking holes across the entire lawn, and raking over fertilizer like I was preparing for a botanical TED Talk. Clarissa watched me from her porch once, sipping cucumber water and wearing what looked like a tennis outfit designed by a Parisian florist. She smirked. She had no idea. Monday night, the eve of the incident, I barely slept. Not from guilt, from anticipation. A kind of electric, slow-burning excitement that hummed behind my ribs. I checked everything twice. Hoses, timers, sprinkler calibration, the slope, the curve of the lawn, the dew point. I even adjusted the sprinklers on a 30-degree bias so that the grass would receive uniform water across the incline without leaving a single puddle. At 7:45 a.m., Tuesday, I activated phase final soak cycle. The special sprinklers ran for 40 minutes, saturating the slope with a gentle mist, then cutting off just as the sun crept higher. By the time Clarissa's tires hit the edge of my property, the grass would look slightly dewy, innocent, but beneath that sheen, the soil was soft, the grass slick and gravity primed. At precisely 9:42 a.m., the black Range Rover rounded the corner, sun glinting off its waxed hood like a challenge. I stood at my study window, coffee in hand, my phone quietly recording from a mounted tripod. She was on the phone as usual, gesturing with one hand while Camilla lounged in the passenger seat. Her eyes didn't even scan the ground as she pulled in tires, whispering over my grass. And then contact. I held my breath. Nothing happened at first. The Range Rover rested. Its heavy frame settled into the lawn like always. For a second, I worried. Had I miscalculated? Was the ground too dry? Was she parked farther up the slope than usual? But then I saw it. The subtle, almost imperceptible shift. The compression of the wet soil. The rear tires adjusted. The nose dipped forward. Clarissa kept talking on her phone. But the SUV wasn't still. It was sliding. Slowly, deliberately, silently. Down. She didn't even notice for the first 5 feet. It wasn't until her front tires left the flat and tipped downward that she looked up, her expression contorting from amusement to disbelief. I watched her brake. I watched her shift into park. I even saw the brake lights flare, as if she could muscle her way back up the hill with pure denial. But gravity didn't care about entitlement. The Range Rover continued its stately descent. 10 feet. 15. Her gesturing turned to flailing. Camilla leapt into the back seat. The front bumper clipped the edge of the koi pond rocks. Then came the sound, a soft, luxurious sploosh, as 2 tons of British engineering entered my pond like a very expensive hippo taking an unplanned dip. The water rose, lily pads tilting. The front grille disappeared, and finally the SUV came to rest, nose first, half-submerged tires helplessly spinning against the slick slope. The driver's side was too steep to open, so Clarissa scrambled out the passenger side, dragging Camilla like a dripping handbag, her floral outfit clinging like seaweed. She was soaked, muddy, and absolutely livid. "Daniel," she shrieked, voice cracking like a kettle on the verge of boiling. "Daniel Reese, what the hell did you do?" I stepped outside, careful to walk slowly, eyes wide with concern. "Oh my gosh, Clarissa," I called, clutching my mug like I just stepped out to check the mail. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" "Your lawn," she screamed. "It's like ice." "Really?" I said, kneeling to touch the grass. "I watered this morning, of course. The hydrangeas were looking a little thirsty. You know how delicate they are. But I had no idea it would be so slippery. Did you not see the incline?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked back at her car, which was now gurgling like a drowning aristocrat. Neighbors had begun to gather. Mr. Langston stood at his fence with a neutral face that barely concealed delight. Mrs. Patel snapped a photo with her iPad. A teenager on a bike muttered, "Dude, that's so sick," before riding off. Clarissa flailed. She called the police. They came, asked for statements, and then, after hearing both sides and reviewing my security footage of the sprinklers innocently watering my lawn that morning, informed her it was a civil matter. She called her insurance. They arrived with a clipboard and a look of horror. "You parked where they asked. On a sloped, wet lawn, beside a pond." Her face turned crimson. She tried calling a tow truck. The first refused. The second quoted a price that nearly made her faint. The third agreed, but required 3 hours and specialized winching equipment. All the while I offered help. Suggestions, sympathy, tea, useless, infuriating kindness. And when her Range Rover was finally dragged out, scraped muddy and leaking pond water from the air vents, she stood in silence, clutching Camilla, looking like a dethroned queen pulled from the moat. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just nodded and said, "If you ever need help replanting those flattened hydrangeas, let me know. I'd hate for them to suffer more than they already have." She didn't respond. She just walked away, soaked, defeated, and for the first time completely silent. That night, the neighborhood buzzed. Whispers, memes, group texts with frog emojis and floating cars. Someone even renamed the koi pond Clarissa Cove on the Google Maps pin. But I said nothing. I just sat at my desk, updated my spreadsheet one final time, and watered my hydrangeas. Thoroughly, just in case. By the time the tow truck finally dragged Clarissa's Range Rover out of my koi pond, mud-caked dripping pondweed from the grill, and wheezing like a retired dragon, the entire neighborhood had seen the show. Some watched from porches with popcorn. Others peeked through blinds like it was the season finale of a series they'd been waiting years to see. Clarissa herself stood on the sidewalk shivering in her soaking designer tracksuit, her mascara and rivulets clutching a poodle that now looked like a drowned cotton ball. I offered her a towel. She declined. Camilla sneezed. And just like that, the queen bee of Rosemeadow Bluffs retreated. But if I thought she was done, I'd clearly underestimated the resilience of a woman who once suggested that holiday wreaths must not exceed 18 inches in diameter for visual cohesion. The very next morning, an email from the HOA board hit every inbox in the community. Subject line: emergency meeting. Violation of common standards and homeowner safety concerns. Clarissa had called a special session, and it didn't take a degree in aerospace mechanics to read between the lines. This was a thinly veiled attempt to paint me as a dangerous rogue element, someone who'd turned a garden hose into a weapon and a koi pond into a trap. I read the email, sipped my coffee, and smiled. Let her come. Because what Clarissa didn't know, what she never bothered to imagine, was that engineers don't just make messes. We document, we log, we prepare. And this time, I wasn't going to her board as a lone neighbor with a complaint. I was going in as a man with evidence, a plan, and an entire neighborhood quietly cheering behind me. Mr. Langston, my neighbor 2 doors down, and a retired municipal attorney with a memory like a steel trap, met me on my driveway that afternoon, holding a binder. "You're going to want to take this," he said, handing it over. Inside was every photograph I'd taken since the beginning. Time-stamped tire tracks, photos of her car's repeated trespassing, a copy of the cease and desist letter, HOA guidelines highlighted in neon yellow, California property law citations, even a printed transcript of the police officer's visit, courtesy of a friend of his in the local department. It was beautiful. "We're not just responding," he said. "We're presenting." I nodded. "And we're delivering copies to every homeowner." And so we did. That night, printed packets landed in every mailbox, tucked in between takeout menus and water bills. Clarissa may have called the meeting, but we set the stage. The following evening, the Rosemeadow Bluffs Community Center overflowed. Some folks brought folding chairs, others stood in the back. Even the Patels, who rarely attended anything that didn't involve food or fireworks, were seated near the front. Clarissa entered last, flanked by Barry, the treasurer, who blinked like he was always mid-apology, and Melanie, the secretary, whose only skill seemed to be typing at the speed of guilt. Clarissa looked like she was trying to channel Jackie Kennedy, elegant, poised, untouchable. But the fresh scar on her ego was visible behind her forced smile. "Let's begin," she said, tapping the mic with far more authority than the situation warranted. She launched into a prepared statement, something about intentional homeowner sabotage, property endangerment, and manipulated irrigation systems. She referenced safety. She referenced bylaws. She didn't reference the fact that she'd been repeatedly warned not to park on someone else's private lawn. She also didn't mention the Range Rover now sitting in a repair shop, waterlogged and mortally embarrassed. When she finished, the room was quiet, tense. That's when Mr. Langston stood up and nodded toward me. I rose, walked calmly to the front, and set my binder down on the podium. "I'm Daniel Reese," I said. "I live at 419 Blooming Crest, and I'd like to present the facts." And I did. I walked the room through every step, from the first unwanted tire tracks to the ignored notes, the HOA's silence, the cease and desist, the property surveys, the logs, the timestamps. I showed the photos. I handed out extra copies. I played the security footage from my porch camera, Clarissa's Range Rover, sliding into the pond in full HD, time-stamped and unedited. I did not booby-trap my lawn, I said. I watered it, as homeowners often do, and I did so on my private property where no one was authorized to park. I asked for help. I followed every procedure, and I was ignored. I turned toward Clarissa. If anyone endangered safety, it was the person who repeatedly, willfully, and arrogantly parked on someone else's land after being told not to. That's not leadership. That's trespassing. Murmurs filled the room. Then someone clapped. Then two more. Then the room joined in. Clarissa tried to interrupt something about misinformation, but Barry awkwardly cleared his throat and reminded her that other homeowners now had the floor. And they did. One by one, neighbors stood up and shared their own run-ins with Clarissa's beautification campaigns. The time she cited a family for leaving their holiday lights up past January 2nd. The time she demanded a veteran remove his front porch flag because it wasn't proportionate. The time she told the Lopezes their sunflowers were visually aggressive. What followed was not a vote of censure against me. It was a motion to initiate a formal vote of no confidence in Clarissa Bloom's presidency. It didn't pass that night. She still had her loyalists, mostly those who feared her more than they liked her. But the damage was done. Her spell was broken. The Queen had no court. Over the next few weeks, things changed. Clarissa was seen less and less. She stopped her daily patrols. Camilla was no longer walked past my house. Her Range Rover, once restored, but forever known as the pawn car, was quietly sold, replaced with a far more modest hybrid sedan. I heard whispers that her insurance had skyrocketed, that the deductible on the water damage nearly made her faint, that her husband had finally insisted she step back from HOA duties for everyone's sanity. She remained president technically, but only in title. Her edicts were ignored, her emails unanswered. She didn't show up to the next board meeting, and when election season came around, she didn't even run. Instead, she left a note in her mailbox addressed "To whom it may concern," stating she would be focusing on personal wellness and floral design. Daniel Reese, villain no more, was invited to join the landscaping committee. I declined. My lawn didn't need defending anymore. It had boundaries now, literal and symbolic. I installed a low lavender hedge along the front edge, soft, fragrant, and thorny if pressed. People complimented it. A few neighbors asked if I'd help them start theirs. The HOA became quieter, more collaborative. The bylaws were reviewed. The decorative aggression clause was struck. Rose Meadow Bluffs, for the first time in years, felt like a community again. And Clarissa Bloom, she still lives down the street. But if we pass each other while I'm tending my hydrangeas, she stares straight ahead. She never parks near my home, not even close. In the end, I didn't win through shouting or lawsuits or sabotage. I won with facts, with restraint. With a little science, a lot of patience, and a very well-timed watering. They still call it the slide of Clarissa Bloom around here. Some even point to the pond and chuckle. But for me, it's simpler than that. It's the story of a lawn line and the day a flower bed fought back. And if you ever doubt the power of quiet resistance, of measured action, just remember what happened when one man defended his hydrangeas. With dignity and just enough water. Sometimes the lines we draw to protect our peace are invisible until someone crosses them. And in the story of Daniel Reese, we're reminded that those lines, even if made of grass and hydrangeas, deserve to be respected. The real lesson here isn't about revenge, it's about boundaries. Personal, legal, emotional. Daniel didn't lash out. He didn't escalate the situation with hostility. He stayed grounded in logic and process and truth. He gathered evidence. He followed proper channels. And when those failed, he used the quiet tools he had: patience, precision, and yes, a little physics to restore the balance. There's something deeply satisfying about that. Not because someone got soaked, but because justice in the smallest of places still matters. For any of us facing that persistent neighbor, that workplace bully, or that community tyrant who thinks the rules don't apply to them, remember this: you don't have to match arrogance with aggression. You don't have to scream to be heard, and you don't need power to fight back. Sometimes a measured, lawful, well-documented response can be more powerful than any confrontation. What Daniel teaches us is that dignity is a form of quiet resistance, that protecting your home, your space, your peace of mind doesn't require force, it requires resolve. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to push back respectfully and firmly, especially when someone makes a habit out of crossing the line. And for those in leadership like Clarissa Bloom, this story reminds us that the positions we hold are only as strong as the integrity we bring to them. Authority without humility will always collapse under its own weight, or in this case, slide straight into a koi pond. From all of us at US Justice Story, thank you for watching. Your support, your comments, and your stories fuel this community and this mission to tell tales that matter, that inspire, and that shine a light on everyday battles for dignity and fairness. Whether you've been the Daniel in your own story, or maybe you've known a Clarissa in your life, we hope this one reminded you of the quiet power of standing your ground with grace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment, share your thoughts, and tell us where you're tuning in from. We read every single one. And remember, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waters the lawn. Until next time, this is US Justice Story. Stay safe, stay kind, and never let anyone park on your peace.